In the spring of 1898, in the thick bush of eastern Kenya, a pair of male lions quietly began to redraw the boundaries predators will cross in order to obtain prey. They were not ordinary lions. They would not be deterred by campfires, loud noises, or thorn walls. They would strike when we were most vulnerable, and in their wake, they laid down a trail of terror and confusion that was primal. But it did eventually end, and over 200 years later, the tale is still told. This is the story of the man-eaters of Tsavo. In March 1898, the British colonial enterprise was building the Great Trans-African Rail Line, a rail line that would connect the Indian Ocean at the port of Mombasa to Lake Victoria inland. The portion of the railroad that was under construction during these events were located near what is now the west gate to the Tsavo National Park. So I pulled up Google to try to locate where this construction project was in 1898, and I'm pretty sure that this location is correct because there are references to the famous man-eating events. So there's this memorial and then a swanky looking hotel. So I'm pretty sure that this is the place and this is where the events occurred. So back in 1898, this area was described as being nearly impenetrable, with thorn thickets called ngaya making up most of the foliage. It was largely impenetrable because elephants were eliminated from this area as a result of ivory hunting. Elephants are nicknamed the bulldozers of the forest, and one of their ecosystem services is to thin out areas with thick vegetation, basically making densely packed vegetation more accessible for many walks of life. And so I'm saying this to illustrate that the laborers were dealing with a much harsher environment at the time of the events. This area would have had thicker vegetation back in the late 1800s, meaning what you see now is the effect of elephants being brought back to the area. The workers were largely Indian laborers and African assistants, and they were housed in camps spread over many miles. The camps consisted of tents, huts, bungalows, and makeshift shelters. This crew was led by Lieutenant Colonel John Henry Patterson, the civil engineer. Now, at first, the darkness gave them some respite from this harsh environment. It was sweltering hot out there. But unbeknownst to the crew and Patterson, there was a pair of maneless lions stalking them in the darkness. One day in March, Patterson was making his rounds around the camps, and one particular tent had an eerie presence to it. He could see the bedding of the tent partially pulled out, and upon further inspection, the dirt looked as though it had drag marks and possibly traces of blood soaked in it. Now, there isn't really any documentation of who this potential first victim was because in 1898, thorough documentation just didn't really exist. So it's not like Patterson knew right away who was sleeping in that tent. Though I'm sure if he asked around, he would have been able to find out. Now, these workers were called coolies, and they weren't exactly treated well. They weren't slaves in the sense that there wasn't legal ownership of them, but they were employed under a system of colonial forced labor practices. So they kind of were in this gray area where they were sort of employed, but also totally being forced to be employed and to work on this construction project, meaning they were heavily exploitable and expendable. So I got the impression that a few missing people here and there probably went unnoticed, especially if they were missing quietly. And at this point, there were no reports of screaming men being dragged out from their tents or witnesses saying that they heard terrifying grunts of a lion. More of an investigation was done when Patterson kind of started to realize oh shit, this might be lions. This is why everybody's disappearing. I might be next. We gotta do something about this. So men were woken up from their slumbers to loud struggles, low grunting noises, and then men's cries, which started out in earshot but then faded into the bush until they fell silent. It became abundantly clear that lions were stalking the camps and workers were on the menu. Several attempts to prevent attacks went on for months, and Patterson stated that on some nights he'd sit in a tree with his rifle in his hand and he would just wait for an opportunity to take a shot. The workers would take breaks from the railroad construction and put up thorn hedges around their camps, and then men started to sleep in groups. Bonfires burned throughout the night. Watchmen would guard the camps at night, and a lot of men said, fuck this, and they left. And at one point, work stopped completely for 3 weeks. But in all of these efforts, the lions adapted. It was almost an arms race. It was an arms race that was heavily in favor of the lions. If maintaining the bonfires were neglected, the lions would pick off campers while the lighting was dim, or workers would disappear when the guards were on the other side of the camp. When the workers were preyed upon, the lions left nothing. One account stated, quote, "Bones, flesh, skin, and blood, they devoured all and left not a trace behind them." Attempts to hunt the lions also took place alongside the preventative methods, so using the bonfires and the thorn thickets or the hedges, and the guards and everything like that. Patterson in general was kind of leading the way with this. He built these scaffolds in several trees to set up an overhead vantage point, and he baited certain areas a couple of times. He used goats and even some of the men. So yeah, scary times. But he accounts for having a couple of close calls himself. And again, this went on for months. March is when it first started to happen, and it wasn't until December that it ended. So March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. Hey y'all, I know YouTube is really saturated with millions of videos uploaded every day, so I really appreciate that you clicked on my video and have made it this far. If you're enjoying the video and would like to support my growth, please like, share, comment, hype, or subscribe. All of those tell the YouTube gods that this video is worth pushing, and so I really appreciate it. Also, I do all of my own research, script writing, recording, and editing myself, so it kind of just gives me a boost in confidence to tell me that I'm doing a good job. So thank you again for taking the time, but let's get back into it. For 10 months, men were dragged out of their sleeping quarters until the arms race started to tip in favor of the men. Patterson fatally shot one of the lions on December 9th, 1898. So what took place on that fateful morning? Patterson recalls seeing one of the African laborers running in the dimly lit hours at dawn. He was waving his hands and looking back behind him, periodically yelling, "Simba, Simba," which means lion. We all know that, right? A man was being attacked, but a group of men overwhelmed the lion, so the lions took a donkey instead. The laborer was letting Patterson know that the lions were focused on their meal, and now this might be his best time to take a shot. They crept towards the kill area, and as if this was written for a movie, one of the laborers that was behind Patterson got snagged on a branch, and it snapped. And that snap was loud enough that the lions heard it. At first, they just kind of growled towards the direction of the snapping twig, but eventually the lions did scare off and the men went back to the camp. Now, Patterson at camp gathered some men and asked them to bang on anything they could to make noise. Drum barrels, they had 2 rocks or 2 sticks together. If they had any kind of noisemakers, they were just trying to make as much noise as possible. And they were using that noise to drown out Patterson as he made his way towards the lions again, but also to cause like a little bit of confusion for the lions. So then Patterson crept up to the area where that donkey was, and he found himself at a spot where there was a clearing. And very soon after, one huge maneless lion stepped out into the clearing. This was one of the only times Patterson has ever seen the lions without the bush disrupting his view, let alone while he had his rifle on him. As the lion crept into the clearing, which was very carefully, by the way, the lion kept looking behind him to where the crew was making all of the noise. And at this point, Patterson pretty much knew that if it wasn't for the orders of having the crew make all that noise, the lion probably would have seen him by now. When the lion was within about 15 yards from Patterson, he raised his rifle to take a shot. The lion spotted that movement, threw back its hind legs, and began to growl. Patterson pulled the trigger and misfired. That really could have been the end of Patterson right then and there, but instead of attacking Patterson, this lion just went into the bush again. But before the lion disappeared completely, Patterson was able to collect his wits. And at that point in time, he took a shot. An angry growl echoed from the bush, and this basically suggested that the lion had been hit. And this was confirmed as Patterson was able to track the lion's blood trail. until he lost it in a rocky patch. So at sundown, Patterson perched himself up on one of his platforms, and once again, he was looking to have a bird's eye view of the camps and possibly just a better place to take a shot. As night fell, Patterson began to nod off into a slumber, and as he was off into a dreamy stupor, something knocked him awake from behind. His heart was pounding, thinking it was the lion pouncing on him. Dear God, Patterson was left thinking, this is it. This is the end. I'm going to die. But it was just an owl. This, of course, spiked his adrenaline, but not for very long. He stayed awake for a little bit, and then the adrenaline wore off and he fell into another stupor. But he was woken up to a twig snapping. This time, it was the lion that he nicked earlier. And Patterson could tell by the illumination of the bonfires made by the camps that this lion was circling him. So with each complete circle, the lion was inching himself closer and closer and closer. This lion was stalking him. At this point, Patterson realized this makeshift platform was not equipped for this scenario. If that lion wanted to leap up on the platform, it could, and the platform would not be able to bear the weight of the lion. So this could very well be Patterson's undoing. Gathering his wits about him, Patterson finally saw enough of the lion from the ambient light for him to aim carefully and pull the trigger. The sound of the shot was followed by a loud, grueling roar and a panic in the bush as the lion ran wild in all sorts of directions. Patterson wanted this to end, so he began to shoot blindly in the bush, using the panic noises of the lion as his guide to where to shoot. 24 hours after the first shot in the clearing, at dawn the next day, Patterson managed to trace the blood for more than a few paces when, upon rounding a bush, he was startled to see a huge lion right in front of him. Now, at first, it looked like the lion was actually going to pounce on Patterson, so of course this scared the shit out of him. But luckily for him, it was just the position the lion laid in its final resting place. So the first of the two lions was now dead. News of this lion being killed spread across the country, and people began trekking to the area to see the lion themselves. From nose to the tip of its tail, this lion was about 9 feet 8 inches. The thing that shocked Patterson the most about this lion was how blemished the lion's fur and skin was. The body of the lion showed markings brought on by the thorn fences the workers had put up, and the markings basically demonstrated just how many times this lion would force its way through the fencing to carry off its next victim. Patterson accounts that his people had only a few nights of respite before the attacks began again, and the first to be attacked was a permanent way inspector, which is basically a higher-up railroad employee. He was residing in a bungalow and had an incident with the second lion. The lion was actually climbing up the veranda. Certainly, this was a bold attempt. Upon hearing this happen, Patterson found an iron shanty close to the bungalow where he baited a few goats and waited for the lion to approach. The lion did, but it was so dark that he didn't know where to shoot, and he suspected that he shot a goat instead. Damn it. At sunrise, they were able to track down the lion from the drag marks of it taking the baited goat, and about a quarter of a mile in, they could hear the lion snacking on its meal. The lion growled as he heard Patterson and his crew approaching. But eventually the lion decided it was not worth the risk, and it took off. The goat was hardly eaten, and Patterson thought the lion would come back for the rest of them. So he hastily put up a scaffold in a tree to ensure that, once again, he had a good vantage point from above. Like the other times, it wasn't until late in the morning, so we're talking like 2 a.m., I guess it's kind of early in the morning, he began to drift off and started to fall asleep. He was suddenly awoken to one of the men keeping him company. Soon, the lion passed almost beneath the scaffold as it made its way to the goat it killed earlier. As it was dark at this moment, Patterson took a shot when he saw just a little bit of the lion's coat shimmering in the moonlight. Now, upon shooting, he saw that the lion dipped down in response to being hit. So he figured the lion would bleed out and it would be an easy retrieval in the morning. But much like the other times, he was able to follow the blood trail for a little bit before it disappeared in a rockier area. After that, a few days went by and there were no attacks. Everyone was convinced the lion did die somewhere far away, but because they had been traumatized by these attacks, they still continued to practice their measures to deter the lion from entering the camps. Basically, they wanted a body or it wasn't dead. So, on day 10, In the middle of the night, Patterson was aroused by screaming from a gentleman that was sleeping in a tree. A lion was climbing up the tree to get at him. On this particular night, the moon was hidden and the bonfires were dimmed. So this was the perfect time for the lion to go ahead and try to take someone. Once you put your guards down, man, they go after you. And in fact, there was nothing Patterson could really do. It was so dark at the time, he couldn't really run there with his rifle to try to shoot the lion. So instead, he kind of just fired off a few rounds anywhere in the air with his gun, and this at least appeared to scare off the lion. The next night, Patterson got back onto a platform looking to guard the area. The moon illuminated the night sky this time, and Patterson faded in and out of sleep. On one occasion, Patterson woke up to the man that was keeping him company being incredibly alert. Thinking the lion was spotted, he kind of fumbled for his gun, but the drowsiness sort of took over with his decision making and he found himself nodding off again. Eventually, Patterson did fight off his drowsiness, and then the moonlight hit the lion's fur just right, just enough for him to get a glimpse of movement. With that adrenaline surging through his body, waking him up, he watched the lion for a bit, confirming that this was indeed a lion and it was stalking them. And again, he saw the lion circling around them, and with each complete circle, the lion got closer. For a brief moment, Patterson felt reverence towards this lion. For a large, brutish lion, he was fascinated by how stealthily it was moving from bush to bush. But soon the lion was getting too close for comfort, and so Patterson raised his rifle and took a shot at his chest. Much like the other times, blood was shed, but the lion did not die right then and there. The lion growled in agony and then leapt out of sight. Now, again, this took place right around 2 a.m., so they waited for the morning to start tracking the blood trail. About a quarter of a mile from the platform where Patterson took that shot, Patterson located the lion and took careful aim and fired. Instantly, the lion sprang and began to charge them. And at this point, Patterson was kind of going out, guns a-blazing. Oh shit, this thing's charging me. So he was shooting at the lion a few times, and each time the lion just kept charging them and getting closer to them. So much so that Patterson and his crew actually started to panic and they retreated to a nearby tree. So the lion charged them, chased them up a tree, and then it seems like he kind of realized that he wasn't going to be able to get him. He was too injured. Basically, his back leg was too injured from the bullets, so he started to limp back into the thicket. But Patterson just wanted to end this and put the lion out of its misery. So he fired towards the head and chest, and then the lion went down, laying motionless. As Patterson approached the lion had one more last charge in him, kind of like watching a movie. But Patterson had his wits about him. He responded with another shot, and that was the fatal one. The lion fell over and laid there motionless, biting on a branch which had fallen to the ground. This lion measured about 9 feet 6 inches, much like the first lion. Also, much like the first lion, the fur of this lion was also deeply scarred by the thorn hedges that it broke through so many times to grab workers. In the immediate aftermath, the bridge work resumed, with some of the workers who had fled coming back to complete the project. Over the following decades, the story became a legend, with the retelling of events being often exaggerated and the body count getting larger and larger. Now, Patterson firmly believed that 135 men were taken, and for nearly a century, that is kind of what was believed. Over a century later, scientists started to investigate this event to see if they could answer the question of why. Why did these lions become man-eaters? After all, we have largely taken ourselves out of the food web due to our use of projectiles and all the deforesting that we're doing. So going after humans is actually kind of a rare occurrence for any top predator. It was once believed that maybe the lions had a prey shortage. Around that time, there was a drought, and a cattle plague, which is known as rinderpest, reduced the population of their normal prey. And as I said in the beginning, the ecosystem was kind of degraded already just due to the removal of elephants. So it's possible they turned to humans, goats, and donkeys because their normal prey just wasn't plentiful. And because humans were staying put in one area, right? They didn't have to follow a migration. Their location was pretty predictable night after night, like why not? That's pretty easy prey. But in one study in 2017, researchers examined the microscopic wears on the lion's teeth, and they confirmed that the dominant lion had a root tip abscess in one of its canines, and this would have made hunting their prey pretty difficult. DNA studies confirmed that these lions had consumed humans, but it was believed they ate around 67 people, not 135, as Patterson suggested. Now, I don't think that this was intentionally over-exaggerated. I feel like if I were to put myself in these people's shoes, I would have probably overestimated the number of victims just because of how traumatizing the events were. It probably would have felt like more people were killed. And nonetheless, it was about 6 to 7 people per month. That still is, pretty often. But when it's all said and done, the dental issues were more likely the reason for why the lions became man-eaters, more so than possibly having their prey populations be reduced. Like, the lions wouldn't have formed the habit of preying on people, considering all of the deterrents and the multiple times that they were shot at. These lions clearly kept coming back because they couldn't get anything else, and it was worth the risk for them at that point. Now, today the lions are on display at the Field Museum in Chicago, and this is how scientists were able to study the event nearly 2 centuries later. I'm from Chicago, and I have seen these lions on display. The Field Museum is amazing. It's an amazing place to visit. So if you are in the area, definitely check it out. All right, guys, thank you for taking the time to watch my video. Again, like, hype, comment, or subscribe if you want to hear more from me or support my growth. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye.